down the street from Disneyland. Let's get rolling.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is David DeMont. I'm with Samy's Camera, and we're here today as part of Samy's PhotoSchool Holiday Education event. And we are very excited to have joining us today our great partners from FujiFilm. We've got Michael and Barney, and our guest speaker today, Aaron Anderson, who's going to be talking about cinematography and cameras and how they all intertwine together and how he has come up with some amazing images and videos over the last few years. So we're very excited about that. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody, Samy's Cameras is open. We are practicing social distancing protocols in all of our brick and mortar locations. We are offering touchless curbside pickup for those of you who are interested in that. And we are open 24/7 on Samys.com for all your holiday gift ideas and needs and photographic equipment. So with that, I will say thank you again to all of you and to FujiFilm, and turn it over to Aaron and the guys from FujiFilm. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I'm gonna dive right in. Like Michael was saying, we're gonna go a little bit over, but I'm gonna try and save a little bit of time for your guys' questions as well. And that'll be the big thing is, let's go ahead and save questions. We're gonna kind of cull through, put your questions in the comments, and then I'll have the whole team kind of look at those questions and they will get them all together, and we'll try to buzz through as many as we can. Afterwards, hopefully I'll answer some while we're going through as well. So if you have a question that comes up, hopefully it'll get answered while we run through. But without further ado, let me share my screen here and we'll get things going. Okay. Okay, guys, so like they said, this is an intro to cinematic photography. What I really want to do is talk you guys through kind of the planning and the mindset behind cinematic photography, and then dive in a little bit to how I create images and the way that I process and think through when we're doing something with cinematic photography. I'm going to burn through the intro really quickly here. You guys hopefully you know who I am, but I am a commercial photographer and director, and I love sport, portrait, and action imagery. I do a lot of composite imagery as well. I've worked with a lot of big brands. You guys have heard all that stuff before. I am a full-time traveler, which means I actually live in an RV with my family of 5, and we travel around. Currently, we're in Northern California. I'm actually kind of hanging out in a garage of a friend's house in Livermore, which is where I actually grew up. And we love traveling around, mostly just taking pictures and drinking as much coffee as possible. I am a huge coffee snob. I'm kind of known as that, but I love to drink a good cup. And I love beautiful light. And this is kind of what brought me to cinematic photography is I just love lighting and I love seeing light. And so what we're able to do now with the cameras and with the lighting to create beautiful images, I just get super excited about. So that's where we are going to move. So the first section, and this is where it all kind of begins for me, is creating a concept. And I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how I create a concept. And then that will be, you'll see the building block for how we move through our lighting, our framing, and everything that we do in the actual image. So the big question that I ask myself when we're trying to make an image before we ever set foot in a studio or on a location is, what are we trying to say? And this is something I want you guys to get in the practice of asking yourselves before you make an image, because as image makers, we all have something to say. And it's important that we know what we're trying to say in a clear way so we can communicate that to the people that we're working with. So establishing a clear vision with what we want the images to say and who we want them to reach is important. And I think it's something that's a little bit overlooked, where we're constantly taking photos all the time, whether it be on a phone or whatever. And it's just, we're not thinking through what we're actually saying with what we have. And it's such a powerful tool that I want you guys to really start asking yourself that question. So one is, I'm going to talk you through kind of some different ideas of how you can tell a story with your images. One is like a big picture. Okay, are we doing this kind of overarching scene? And so we're including a lot of different elements and people, and it's all going to be right there in one picture. Or are we telling a human narrative? One of the things that I think could be really cool is to think about your photography as a writing or as a video. And that's, oops, sorry, we got pups running around here. So think about how they can tell stories. You can tell it in a first person, you could tell it in a second or a third person. And I think that could really change your mindset for photography. What if you told it from a first person where you could only see someone's hands, like handing something? And it just can change the way your story reads and change the way you tell your story. Again, I'm just kind of going over the overarching principles of storytelling here because I want you guys to start thinking about this as you're planning your images. With a product, I think that's the same thing. When we get into product photography, a lot of times we just think, oh, we're going to put this product here and we're just going to make it really pretty and that's going to be everything. Well, turn that into a story. What are you trying to say? What things could we include or disclude in the image to help tell the story of the brand or the product that you're trying to put out there? And then ultimately, I want you guys to really think about the purpose of what you're doing. And that's where I feel like things start to get lost. And this will be a good lead into any kind of cinematic photography is what do we want this image to do? I think one of the things I talk about a lot is the responsibility we have as image makers. They're so powerful. They can make huge changes in the world. They can impact people's lives. So really think about what the purpose of what you're doing is, and that'll help to kind of steer the ship for everything that you do. Okay. So now that we kind of think about that's where I want your framework to begin, is that idea of storytelling, the different types of stories I just wanted you to have in your mind so that maybe it creates a different element of creativity in you. And you can say, okay, I want to do a really different first person perspective or an overarching narrative or something like that. But then it's time for the brass tacks. We need to actually start getting all the pieces together. And the first part of that for me is finding the right talent. So I want to talk about how you find the right talent and when you need a professional versus when you can just use your friends or your family or someone you even met on the street. So with professionals, this is going to be the case a lot of times when you're working with clients. They're going to want to work with someone who is established in the industry. My recommendation to you, especially if you're just getting started with cinematic photography or this kind of narrative storytelling photography, is to start meeting people as often as you can who are models or actors. Especially actors can be really useful in this type of photography because they really give a lot of emotion and you can direct them a little bit easier than sometimes you would be able to real people. You can reach out to different places like modeling agencies, actors clubs or different things like that, and start reaching out to them now, and then start doing what's called test imagery, where you can get a model to come out and you guys can shoot together and do a story that you've wanted to tell. And then in return, you give them the images. So start making those relationships now. And you're going to hear me say that a lot. Your networking, your connections with any type of photography, but especially with cinematic photography, are going to be really, really important. The other thing that you're going to hear me say a ton is the word communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. You guys need to tell people what you're trying to accomplish. And that's where that whole idea of what's our story, what's our narrative comes into play, so that when you have talent coming, you can say, listen, this is the story, this is the feeling, and this is how I want it to look. And I send out call sheets and different things even before to make sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone knows what we're doing. The second option is real people. We'll call them real people. Models are real people too. I feel like we should make a shirt out of that. But telling a true story is one of my favorite things. Is just meeting somebody on the street and seeing their story and creating something from that story. I would say if you're just getting started in cinematic photography, start here. Take your grandpa, take your grandma, go meet a barista or somebody that you want to tell their story, and then tell it in a really beautiful way. And we're going to talk about lighting, we're going to talk about locations here in a second, but these stories are the ones that I feel like can be a great challenge. And you can actually have to tell a true story and make it in a way that you see it in a beautiful and incredible way, where they see the picture and it's like, man, I've always felt this way about my craft, but now it looks the way that I've always felt, which is awesome. And this can be so many different people, your friends, your family, baristas. I have met so many different people through my career. And a lot of times it's just having the courage to walk up and ask somebody if they would let you take their picture. And that is a big step, you guys. If you can start to learn now that kind of boldness of, hey, would you let me? what I want you to keep in mind is if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I've lived by that model my whole life. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. So if you don't ask, then you're always going to get a no. But if you walk up, there's a chance that they might say yes. So keep that in mind the next time you feel a little nervous or you're not sure if you want to go ask, just go ask and see if they'll let you take their photo. I know in the time of COVID, it's a little bit weird, but I feel like we're back on the rails to getting a little bit more normal, and we'll be back making those photos again. And again, communicate. I'm gonna be the hammer here on this one, you guys, especially with people who are not actors, who are not models. You need to make sure they know what you're trying to say, what you're trying to do, give them an idea, show them test images, show them things that make sense with their story so that they can see what you're trying to create and then help you in that process. Okay. Ooh, we're going to burn through this, you guys. I hope you guys are with me on this one. But now we're going to move on to finding the right location. One of the questions I get a lot is, how do I get into the locations that I get into? We shoot a lot of abandoned buildings. In fact, this shot here was shot at an abandoned hotel in Oregon. It was amazing. The owner actually walked us through and told us all the history about how it was a brothel and then it was a hotel. But anyways, I don't have time for all those stories today, but it was an amazing location. So what location tells a story? The reason why we started with the story is because everything we do has to support the story. So now that we're onto the location, we want to make sure that we find the location that tells the story you're trying to show. If you are telling a true story, obviously it makes sense to be either in a similar location or at the location where this story happened. Sometimes you might find something that looks a little bit better. Like if you're telling the story of a woodworker, there might be a more beautiful woodworking shop that you can work in or something of that nature. But a lot of times you'll find when you're telling true stories, it's actually a little bit easier because the location is kind of built in as a package deal. But let's talk about how I get different locations and how you guys can start to get these different locations as well. Abandoned buildings. People ask me this all the time. How do you get into so many abandoned buildings? I'm going to keep saying it again and again. It's about networking. It's about reaching out to people. First step for me is always talking to people that I know and that I love and that love me. So if you have friends, just say, hey, I'm looking for XYZ. So in this case, I'm looking for an abandoned building. Do you know anyone who has an abandoned building that I could shoot in? It could be an abandoned barn or a shed in the back or something like that. I've shot in all types of locations like that. And a lot of times your friends are just really willing to help you. The other thing is to find out who owns the building. So it is public record who owns them. A lot of times you can get a phone number of some kind, and then you can just call those people. Again, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. But then you could start to make these contacts and make these connections. One of the people that I met through a friend, and they owned a ton of abandoned buildings. And then they ended up actually taking us on a tour of them. And then we got to shoot in a bunch of different ones that they owned. And that was just because we asked a friend who then introduced us to somebody who had abandoned buildings. Another thing that's worked for me in the past is calling commercial real estate. So if you're driving by someplace that's abandoned and for sale, just call and say, hey, I'm interested in shooting at this location. Would you be willing to, either for a fee or just let us shoot there? And then you could use the images to show the building or something of that nature. I have had good luck with that. And I've actually done where I shot an abandoned Greyhound track, and that was all because I just called a real estate agent. So that's something to think about in a city or town where you are. Post it on social media. This really goes into the friends idea, saying, hey guys, I'm looking for this type of location. Does anybody have a lead on something like that? And if all else fails, and you will hear me say this a few times, then hire a producer. They are a little bit expensive, but they are worth their weight in gold. And sometimes they'll just work with you to try and find something. So they'll have a reduced fee. And then you can do the legwork of actually setting it up and signing contracts and all that different stuff. But don't be afraid to look at having a producer that you know that can just look into buildings for you. Or maybe you pay them a day fee for just one day of production or something like that. And they will definitely, producers in general are so helpful on so many different levels. So really look into that. Hotel rooms. Shooting in hotel rooms is super duper fun. And there's all different kinds. And a lot of times, depending on what type of town you're in, you can get old grimy, vintage, all these different types of things. And the great thing about them is they're easy to find and they're easy to see what they look like, because you can just go onto a web page, pull up the images, and see if it's what you're looking for. The one thing I will say is always ask for permission. I would much rather you guys get into a situation where you have everybody on the same page and they know what's going on, as opposed to getting there, setting up, and then somebody coming and saying, hey, you're not allowed to do that here. I have some really fun stories about asking for permission, which I actually have to skip today. But let's just say I've had some really interesting conversations with some really interesting hotels. And once I showed them my work and I reassured them that we weren't shooting any pornographic type things or images there, they were great and they were on board and they were super helpful. Tend to be very cheap. They tend to be maybe $60, $100, which is fantastic. And you could stay the night there if you wanted to. You could shoot and then spend the night. They're really willing to work with you, but I would highly recommend going in person. And in this day and age, I feel like we're getting a little bit closer to being more comfortable with going in person again. At the very least, call them. But I would say if you can go in person and talk to somebody, maybe even bring your portfolio or bring just some examples of some images that you've created, it's much, much easier to get a yes from somebody when you're standing across from them, as opposed to when you're sending an email or something of that nature. I feel like in our society, especially, it's become a lot less personal. So even if you need to stand 6 feet away when you're asking in person is a whole lot better than trying to send off an email or something like that. So don't kind of fall into that trap of being emailing and texting all the time. Keep it personal and it makes it a lot easier. People's homes. This is the perfect example of this. It just happened. We just shot a commercial and I was at my friend's house a few weeks before and I said, man, your house was perfect for a shoot that I just did. It's got so much patina and just great vibes. And he was like, if you ever need it, just let us know and it's yours. And we did need it. About a week later, I called them and said, hey, remember I said your house was perfect? And they were like, absolutely come. And we ended up having a big group there shooting for 4 or 5 hours. And they were more than happy to let us in there. And they're good friends of mine. So it was nice and comfortable and easy. But don't forget the people that you already know. You're going to be in their houses already. You know what they look like. You've been in the space. It's super good for this type of work. You can also look at things like vacation rentals, like Airbnbs or VRBOs. The one warning I will put out there for that, one, you really got to make sure you ask permission and also check their policies. A lot of the VRBOs and Airbnbs now have a line in their contracts that say, no photography or like commercial photography or video is allowed. So really make sure you check that and just be honest. Maybe you call them and say, listen, I saw that you have a policy. I wanted to see why and wanted to see if it'd be possible to either pay a little bit extra or something like that to do a photo shoot here. And again, post on social. The one thing I say is everybody wants to be the guy, right? The guy or the girl who knows the guy or the girl that has the place or the thing. And it just feels good to be like, oh, I know that guy. And everybody loves that. So post it out there and you will be shocked at who knows who and who has locations that you can use. Professional sets. Now, these are kind of I'm just going to do a quick blurb about them because these are pretty obvious. If you have the money or the... There we go. That was weird. You all hear me. I hope you guys can hear me okay. Muted. Hold on one second. It's saying I am muted. Can everybody hear me okay? Michael, are we good?
Yeah,
okay.
You're fine. You're coming through fine.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to keep rolling. Okay, so professional sets, you can find them all kinds of places. There's also things like Peerspace, which has been a good one, but they tend to be more expensive. So if you have the budget for it, it's an easy way to go. At this point, you're probably going to be working with a producer or something like that anyways. But in larger metropolitan areas, these are really an option. If you're down in Southern California, or I know out in Atlanta or things like that, they're going to have lots of different options for you. Some of them are cheaper than you'd think, so look around before you totally dismiss them. I know in LA, there's some really cool places that You can get hourly and they're under $100 an hour, you know, depending on what you're wanting to spend. And then be creative. You guys, the one thing, if you think about hiring a producer for a little bit, maybe he can find you a location that you couldn't find otherwise, and maybe he can get it for free, or she can get it for free. Just be creative in the way that you look for locations, but hopefully between these different recommendations, if you have this idea that's been burning in your mind and you just need to get it out of you and you just don't have the right location, this can be the process that you go through to start looking for one. Okay, we're going to move forward. Let me go back into this. I want to pause really quickly, guys, and talk about the importance of scouting. If you don't know what scouting is basically going physically to the location and having someone, preferably yourself, look at it before you shoot there. You really, really, really need to go look. You need to have some kind of eyes. The reason why is, as I move forward with this presentation, you want to know what the space is like so that when you're setting up lights and you're setting up talent and you're setting up your camera, you want to know you have space and freedom to move throughout the set and make the look that you are going for. If you can't go physically yourself, I try to go scout on my own. Obviously, sometimes if it's in a different state or a different location, make sure you send someone else and ask them to do video for you. A lot of times they'll take a couple stills of like the place that you want to shoot, and that's okay, except for they're not showing you that right behind you is a wall that makes it impossible to put up any lights or be far enough away to put your camera down. So make sure they do a video of the whole room so you can get an idea of the dimensional space and be able to put up your lights and your cameras so that you're not going to walk into a room and be super surprised about how nothing you thought you were going to be able to do is actually going to work. One of the things that's worked for me in the past is asking the owner. A lot of times they'll have photos from like real estate listings, or they'd be even willing to go in and take some videos for you and send them along. That's what we had happen in Oregon. And it just gave me a better idea mentally of what I was going to do once I walk into the space. Guys, make scouting a priority. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I want you to know that scouting should be a part of what you do. And I know when I first started, I don't think anyone even mentioned the word scouting to me for years. And then I had to figure out, oh, who scouts? How do we scout? What do we do? Make sure someone on your team has been in this location before you walk into it. I'll step off my soapbox and we're going to move on. All right. So one of the big things now we're going to work in
Aaron?
Yeah.
Quickly, before you move off of locations, do you have anything you need to say about permits?
We can. Let's talk about permits afterwards. Can we write that one down, Michael?
Yep.
Perfect. Yep, we'll talk about permits after. Okay, let's move on to color. And I want to talk about how color is so important for telling our stories and how they feel and how they come across and what we're trying to say. Guys, color theory is an entire class in and of itself. It is absolutely essential, especially to cinematic photography, but I think to photography in general. I only have an hour, so we're not going to spend a bunch of time on color theory, but I'm going to give you a few different tools that will hopefully get you guys moving in the right direction, and then give you guys some different things that you can start to shift your mindset about how you look at colors and how you're absorbing them every single day. So resources. Let's talk about a few things that I use all the time, and it's really just to get myself immersed in color, but also to have it around me all the time so that I can take notes on color and have them quickly and easily available for me to look at when I'm on set and when I need to come up with something on the fly where it's like, okay, I want this color, and this color, and know these go together, or we're even working with a brand where we need to find colors that go with theirs. The first thing that you should have, this is going to feel like community college here, is a color wheel. Color wheels are free. You can get them on your phone. You can go get them at the hardware store. I think I have a really nice one that we got at Home Depot because it has to do with painting and things like that. This will show you the different color harmonies. It'll show you like triadic and tertiary and all these different things. If you don't know those terms, I would challenge you to go and learn them now. Learn what your primary colors are. Learn what complementary colors are. Learn all these different things so that you can start to apply them in the work that you do. And you'd be surprised if you start seeing these now, how much it will come up if you watch a film or anything like that. So I use an app called the Color Wheel. I use it all the time. I have it on set. I have it with me. The other thing I use is something called Adobe Capture. If you guys are using Adobe, which I'm assuming most of you are, it should be included in your subscription. And what it does is it allows you to take a picture of something, and then it shows you what the primary colors are, and you can even save those into your library. And it's been immensely helpful. I will say one of the kind of weird spaces, I have a ton of pictures from the movie the Lego Batman movie, because of the way they use these color harmonies throughout the whole thing. So if you don't have kids and you haven't watched the Lego Batman movie, watch it. It's not only funny, but it's got beautiful colors, and you can build a color library just off of the Lego Batman movie. Then there's all kinds of different sources. One that I use is the Color Palette Cinema, which is on Instagram. They basically take frames from popular movies and then they put these color harmonies down for you to use. And you can save them or you can reference them later. And I love seeing these colors. And this is just a way to get your guys looking at these colors all the time and absorbing these colors all the time, so that when you're on set, it's just a natural thing that you see, and it's the way that you see the world. The best way to get yourself in color is to immerse yourself in color and surround yourself with it. It's as simple as watching sunsets with intentionality. I love watching sunsets. Some people make fun of me for it, but I just love to sit out there and watch the colors change and see how it affects the faces of the people around me or the trees or whatever it is, and see how the light falls, see how the light changes. And that's going to help you be more educated in the choices that you make. Also, I am a huge movie person. I drive my kids crazy because I'm constantly pausing movies and taking pictures of frames. And my kids also say stuff like, "Oh, Dad, was that a good shot?" And it's like, yes, that was a good shot. I love that. And so my kids are seeing it, and they're seeing like, oh man, this is beautiful. It not only is it fun and it's a great way to go through life, but it will help you to start to see more, and you'll start to see this cinematic vision and have this kind of creative color harmony idea. Museums, I don't know if they're all back open yet, but when they are, museums are great for this. If you're allowed to take photos, use your Adobe Capture to take photos of popular paintings and then see those color harmonies that they use. That's so much fun for me to see these great painters and even photographers and see what colors they were using, because I know they used them with intentionality, especially in paintings. It's so cool. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about cinematic lighting. I am going to spend a small amount of time on this, and we're going to talk about some lighting diagrams. But the one thing I want to drive into you is that cinematic lighting is not a recipe. It's not this one thing that we do. And I'm going to talk you through what that means. You might have heard cinematic lighting also referred to as motivated lighting, and I'll explain that a little bit too as we move into this. So what is it? Cinematic lighting tells a story. The focus is to make the viewer of your image see the story that you are trying to show. It's not about the lighting. And I'm going to hash this over again and again and again. It's not about the lights. You don't want people to be thinking about lights when they're looking at your photos. Make sure everything you do complements the story that you're trying to tell. And I keep saying it, but that's why we start with the story and then build from there to keep everything moving forward. It should create emotion. You guys, the whole idea of cinematic photography, of motivating lighting, is we want people to feel something when we look at our images. I don't want people to feel like, hey, that's a cool photo. I want people to be engaged with what we're doing and to see it as something we're trying to say and say, man, what is this that's going on here? There's obviously something else. This is a story. And that brings them into the image as opposed to brings them into the lighting. So whenever you put up a light, and this is a question I want you guys to get used to, just like the idea of what am I trying to say? I want you to ask yourself when you put up a light, is this helping to tell the story that I want to tell? Or is it distracting from that story? Because it's going to be doing one of two things. It's either going to be helping to clarify the story, or it's going to be detracting from the story itself. So ask yourself that question. When you set up a light, why am I putting this light here? It's not a recipe. You guys, I talk about this quite a bit. And one of the things I want you guys to know, people ask me like, what is my favorite lighting setup? And well, always, you should never say always. Most of the time we'll say, I don't have one because I very rarely use the exact same lighting setup over and over. It's not about having one lighting setup, the 45-45 coming across with the Rembrandt lighting. It might be cool, but that's really about lighting. That's not about your story. What you want to do is you want to know how to use your lights to put them in places that tell your story in the best way possible. So it's not a recipe. What is on you is to know how your lights work and then to use those to tell your story in the best way possible. So I'm not going to answer that question today of what's your favorite lighting setup because I don't have one. And I hope I never do, because that means I'm doing the same thing over and over, which for me is just not that interesting. Incognito, you guys, your lights shouldn't be what people are looking at. When you have a lighting setup, one, people should be confused by it. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But two, they shouldn't really be able to tell what you did. They shouldn't be like, oh, well, that's a octabox camera left and then a strip box. You can see it in the key lights and the catch lights and blah, blah, blah. No, they should look at it and just be like, oh my goodness, how did they do this? I love it when people say that. And I want that to be what you guys are shooting for as well, is the question, how'd they do this? I love it. So let's talk about, I'm going to expand on that just a little bit more with your lights being tools, not subjects. So many times what drives me insane is you have a beautiful model standing in a field with a sunset right behind him, and then a key light coming right across the front. They're totally different colors. And then these photos get posted over and over and over again. It's like, why is that light there? What's happening? And I think in photography, we've kind of been lulled into this place where it's like, well, I have lights, so I'm going to use lights. I'm going to use these lights. And sorry, we've got a lot of kiddos running around here today. I apologize. But I'm just going to put up a light just because I want to use it. And I wanted you guys to step away from that. If you need the light there to tell the story that you're trying to tell, then use it. But if it shouldn't be there, if it's confusing to the viewer or to your eye, like why is a sunset coming from behind with a huge light coming from in front that are two different colors in the middle of a field, then maybe we need to think about how we're lighting and think about why we're lighting that specific way, which goes back to that question, why is this light here? Okay, let's keep moving. How are we looking here? Hopefully you guys are staying with me. I'm burning through this fast on a Monday morning, no less. So lighting with purpose, you guys, lighting with purpose needs to be adaptive, which means you should be able to walk into a location and move your lights around to mold into that specific situation. If you have windows, walls, anything that you have there, it becomes a tool and it becomes something that you need to use and incorporate. And I'm going to show you some lighting setups to give you a little bit better idea of that in a second. But this comes from knowing your lighting equipment. A lot of people ask me questions like, well, what'll happen if I take this light and I put it over here and then I shoot it at this power? The answer to the question is, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen if you do that. But you can find out if you go and do it. Don't be afraid to try and fail. Take your light out, get a friend, and go take some pictures and move the light a little bit here, a little bit there, put it behind them. Don't be afraid to do whatever you want to do with those lights to see how they work. I think it's intimidating for a lot of people at first to take a light and just point it at your camera, see what it does. Maybe you'll really like it. And then you know how you need to move it when you get into a certain situation. Guys, it can be cheap. I know I'm going to talk about some of the equipment I use, and I know it can be daunting because it's expensive. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given was by actually a professor back when I was in school. And that was create with what you have. Don't worry about what other people are using, but create with what you have. You guys, when I started, I didn't start with a ton of crazy expensive equipment. You can go and jerry rig a bunch of this stuff together. You can go to hardware stores. I built V-flats for $30 out of foam core from the Home Depot or whatever. I don't know if I'm supposed to sell those names, but you guys just be creative. The best example I'm going to give you is there was a lighting setup that I get more questions about than any other lighting setup that I did with a professional boxer named Michaela Mayer. And it's these 3 lights behind her, and then I have some other lights on the side. And people ask me all the time how I did that. And I went to the hardware store, I ripped apart some normal shop lights, and then I rigged them up so I could put them on C-stands and put them behind her. And that's how I made it. And it was maybe less than $100. But if you bought that same lighting setup brand new for lighting, it would be thousands of dollars. So just think, be creative at first. These things will come. With every shoot that I did, I think I bought a new C-stand for the first like year of my career, and slowly you'll build, but don't let it stop you from creating now by saying, oh, I can't do it because I don't have $10,000. That's just not the case. The thing that's great about photography that makes it different from video is that we have one frame to tell an entire story, which means you guys have to be careful about everything in the frame. Use your foreground, use the elements in. Don't be afraid to take things out of an image. Simplify it. Everything that you see in your frame should be something that you designed to be in your frame, and everything in your frame should tell the story you're trying to tell. If it detracts from the story at all, just take it out. Don't even think about it. Take it out. It doesn't make any sense, then pull it out. Or you can try to hide it with the way that you light, with the contrast, with the way that you have foreground or background. Just make sure you're thinking through what visual elements. I think you have, they say, about a half a second to catch someone's attention. So make sure everything in your picture, in your frame, is there on purpose, and it's pulling them into that story. And that goes into this idea of leading your viewer. You need to make sure that the flow of an image is correct. How does the eye move through the image? And this is something you can ask your friends. You can ask, I ask my wife, make sure there's somebody who is semi-knowledgeable of photography, but have them look at it and see how they feel and see what's not working and what is. And these are things that you'll learn over time, but really be intentional with how you're leading your viewer through your image. You want them to be drawn in. You want them to go to places with contrast and be aware of words and all these different things. That's the stuff I don't have time to go into today, but just be aware of what you're saying with the things that you include or take out of an image. One of the things that you're going to really have to learn is the idea of balancing ambient and strobe. And this, again, is going to come back to you guys actually doing the work. You're going to have to go out and you're going to have to shoot with lights and have the sun or have a lamp or anything like that. And this goes back to one of my favorite questions I've ever been asked is, did you light that scene with a desk lamp? And the answer, of course, is no, we didn't light a scene with a desk lamp because desk lamps are not great at lighting scenes. But that's what we want them to feel, because we want to learn how to use the ambient light outside. We want to learn how to use our strobes and bring everything together to balance it. The only way you can accomplish that is by doing it again and again and failing until you actually get it the way you want it in your mind. There was a video that I used to watch all the time that talks about this gap. It's by Ira Glass, I think is his name. This gap between what you see in your mind and when you actually have the image come out the way you want it to. And I can tell you from great failure and experience, it's going to take time before what you see in your mind is what you see in your camera. But that's only going to come if you keep doing the work and putting yourself in situations that make you feel uncomfortable until you start to see the images rise out that you really want to create. And then one day someone's going to say, oh my goodness, did you light that with a desk lamp? And you can say, yeah, of course we lit it with a desk lamp. Okay. Haze. I get asked a lot about haze. I am not going to spend a lot of time on it because we are running low on the time these days. But haze is the best way to create atmosphere in a photo. And if you ever see lighting in an image, there's haze there. If it's a video, if it's whatever, you have to have particles in the air to see the light that you're creating. So keep that in mind. If you've ever seen an image where there's beams of light or there's rays of light or there's anything that is just, which I think is absolutely gorgeous, there has to be something in the air to show it. And haze for me is one of the best ways to do that. Now, quick side note, haze is so much fun. It is also super addictive and can be overdone, which I am extremely guilty of doing sometimes. So just be aware of how much haze you have in a certain situation. If you can't see your talent super well, you might have too much haze in the room. I don't know. It depends on what you're doing. But just kind of keep that in mind. It just is so much fun to have and have this really cool hazy environment where you can see all these beams of light. But you might need to dial it down a little bit every once in a while. And in that case, just like open up a door or a window real quick and it'll vent out. I would say let people know you're doing this because sometimes it can look like the building's on fire if you have a lot of haze. Okay, here's the haze machines and fog machines that I use. I get this question very often, so I just want to get it out of the way. I use for my hazer, the Hurricane Haze 1DX. It's been great for me so far. And then I also use the Hurricane Fog 700. Now, quick talk on why I have both. A fog machine, which is the one on the right, puts out a really dense cloud of smoke, and it tends to have kind of a bluish coloration to it. It's much harder to see through as well. So if you just blast this right at the talent, you're going to see the shape of it, and it's going to feel like there's smoke right in front of them, which if that's what you're going for, awesome, then use that. If this is all you have, because these are really cheap, make sure you blow it through a fan or something to disperse it, because otherwise it's so thick and intense. But I have also noticed there's quite a bit of blue coloration to this as well. So watch that. The haze machines put out like a really fine mist, which I think is a little bit better, especially for cinematic photography. It's not so intense and you don't really see the shapes. And so it's more in the background, if you will. You're not thinking about it being smoke because it's just kind of floating everywhere, as opposed to being these clouds that have spirals and shapes to them. So just something to think about. The haze machine is a little more expensive. I don't even know how much these are, but these are the ones that I use. All right, we're going to hop into some lighting examples. I'm going to go through pretty quick, but I want you guys to keep in mind, I am not telling you that this is what you need to go out and do. I'm showing you how we had to adapt to certain situations to make the lighting and the image that we wanted to make for the story we are trying to tell. Okay, so for this first one, I'm going to go through three or two different sets in the same shoot to give you an idea of how we had to move and the kind of different steps we had to take to make the images we wanted to make. This first one, I had actually scouted the location at a different time of year and the sun shifted. And so originally I was going to do this sunset by this barn and I thought it was going to be amazing. And so we got there and I realized that the sun had shifted and we weren't going to get a sunset at all. And so we had to make our own sunset. One of my favorite ways to make a sunset is to take a reflector and then put a grid on it, and then put a gel on it. And in this case, you're going to see this word CTO and CTB. CTO means color temperature orange, and CTB means color temperature blue. I'll tell you why in just a second, but on this one, we had a CTB. And one of the cool ways to create a fake sun is to put a hard source of light in front of a soft source of light. So we have a hard source of light in the reflector right in front of a 53-inch octabox. And then on the back side, we have this cyan fill, and it's really not supposed to be something you're really seeing. It's just to punch a little bit of blue into the shadows, because when the sun sets, the shadows tend to look a little bit more blue. So these are things that we know because we've been looking at sunsets, and we know that the shadows tend to have a little bit of cyan and a little bit of blue in them at the end of the day. So here's the setup. Over on the right-hand side, you can see that little tiny fella with the big softbox, and over to the left, we have a big umbrella with a cyan gel inside of it. And this is what the image looks like. Hopefully, you wouldn't look at this and say, oh my goodness, this is definitely a 3-light setup that's right out to the side. What we want people to think is, oh man, what a beautiful sunset shot that he took. The blues on the left side are all there on purpose. The hard light with the soft wrap is all there on purpose. The orange is there on purpose. You guys, we were thinking about what we were doing because of the story we were trying to tell. And I love doing stuff like this because this one threw us for a loop. We weren't ready for this scenario, but because we know how our lights work, we set them up and we got our shot. All right, this next one is a really fun one, and you'll see me do stuff like this a lot. I love shooting lights right at my camera and shooting them through windows. In the back, I have 2 ELB 500s with CTOs. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. Hope not. CTOs, remember, is color temperature orange, and that's to create this really robust orange feel that's going to mimic a sunset coming through a window with lots of beams because we have our hazer going. Then the interesting thing that we had to kind of figure out was a tight area, but it didn't have lights for us to really use. And I was thinking, well, this type of area would have a light bulb hanging down or something that's really got a tungsten feel, which if we know about color theory, tungsten is really orange. And so I just decided to shoot a reflector up into the ceiling because the ceiling was wood. We knew it would reflect orange. So I didn't put a CTO on it because that would have been too much. And then to fill our shadows, I have a large silver reflector just bouncing up to get, because you'll see he's wearing a cowboy hat and we needed to get a little bit of light back under his eyes. Here's that lighting setup. So you can see the reflector off to the side, just going straight up into the wood. We've got the two lights coming through to create those beams. If you see those, that's sweet. The beams coming off of that skull up top. I love stuff like that. And then this is what our final image looked like. So you can see there's a little bit of fill on the top of his hat, and that's from the bounced light. We got the beams coming in, and then to balance those out, we have the silver reflector, which without that silver reflector, you really wouldn't be able to see his face. And again, it's subtle. We want you to move between his eyes and his hands and get the idea of this story. And you bet we took a ton of stuff out of the background to make sure that people were focusing on the things we wanted to focus on and tell a story. This is an image I hope people can just sit and look at for a second and look at what he's going through. It was an amazing space to be in. I love being in spaces like this. It's so much fun. Okay, those are your two lighting examples. The reason I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on lighting, well, A, we don't have a lot of time, but B, there's so many different options. There's so many different combinations that you are going to come up with. And I can't wait to see what those are. But just look at the way that we moved through a location. The whole idea was not about the 45 or this octobox or making sure we use that thing. It was making the lights do what we wanted them to do. So just keep that in mind when the next time you're out on set or the next time you're out playing or experimenting. That's what your lights are for. Your lights are there to work for you, not the other way around. All right, let's get into gels. I use gels a ton. I love gels. I'm excited about gels. And let's talk about why we use them and how it kind of all started. The first reason you would use a gel and how it kind of all got started was with matching light or simulating a type of lighting. Originally, there was, say, a light coming in through a window and then a tungsten light source that you had inside of the building. Well, those two lights are different color temperatures, which means they look totally different when you see them on film. Sometimes that might work, but other times you might want them all to look exactly the same. And in that case, you can gel the windows or you can gel the lights inside and you can match them so you're getting exactly the look that you're looking for. This photo on the right is an example of that. We wanted this to feel like a sunset. This is like a 10 light setup, but they all had gels on them to make sure we had the temperature coming in that we wanted it to, and created this really beautiful environment in such a cool space. This again was one of those spaces we just called them. This is actually a school. I can't believe it's a school, but it's a school. And we called them and we said, can we shoot here? And they said, sure. And they think they charged us like $100. It was crazy. The other thing that gels are awesome for is special effects. And I love doing this kind of stuff. This is about creating something beautiful and gritty or just really eye-catching and still staying on your story. I mean, with this is a female U.S. boxer. Oops, sorry. We got someone else coming in here. Can we mute everybody, Michael? Let's make sure we mute everybody. There we go. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Let me get back into this. So we are working with a boxer. She's actually, her name is Jenny Fuchs. She is the #1 boxer in the world right now, female boxer. And in the Olympic space, she boxes for Team USA. And we are telling this story of, hey, these are the spotlights when she's coming into the ring, and this is her thought, and she's getting into her mood, and it could be anywhere. This is actually just in a small studio. But we're using the colors and the complements. They happen to be red, white, and blue. Oh, she fights for Team USA. And we're thinking about what we're doing, right? And I love doing stuff like this. So really think about the different ways you can use gels. I definitely recommend having gels in your kit. And let me talk, before we move on to some of the gels that I have, let me tell you why I want you to get used to using gels. And not just can you add it in post. The question I have had, and I've actually heard people discuss, is can you just add it in post, being the colors that you're getting from those gels? And yes, you absolutely can. However, I do not think it looks as authentic. It takes a lot more time, especially depending upon how many images you need to produce from this shoot. And the other thing that I want you guys to really think about with colors and gels is if you're just adding it in post as kind of an afterthought, I want to make sure that you're thinking through the story while you're on set. I don't want you guys to get into the habit of do it in post, of add it in post. I want you guys to get in the habit of let's do it in camera and tell the story that I want to tell right now, so that when it gets into post-production, it just enhances the story. A little background on me. I actually started as a retoucher. So I've seen a lot of things come through that the idea was just, we'll just add it in post. We'll just do it in post. And it feels like there's not a lot of thought there. And also when you're coloring things in post-production, because of the way that it affects your exposure and the way that it affects the subject, it's a lot harder to get that really beautiful combination of colors that blend together well, that have seamless gradients from one color to the next, and then have that blend of colors. Sorry, I just covered my microphone. Have that blend of colors come together in a way that feels natural and feels realistic. So can you do it in post? The answer to that question is yeah, sort of. But what I want you guys to do is get used to doing it in camera, so you're making intentional choices with what you're doing on set. And then when you send it to your retoucher or you retouch it, we're just enhancing the story you're already trying to tell. Okay, the gels, I just want to talk you guys through really quickly. I get this question a lot too. I use what's called a digital after dark kit from Roscoe, and they have a ton of gels in this kit. You can start with super basic kits that just have like the primary colors. You can start with kits like this. I use a 12 by 12 square. And with a lot of the new lights, because they're not tungsten modeling lights anymore, a lot of these new lights have LED modeling lights. I tape them. So you just use gaff tape and you just tape them to the bars of your modifier or to the outside of your reflector. And then you have these beautiful colors coming through all of your modifiers. Because a lot of people, you'll see like saying you need to get rolls of gels or things like that. You don't need to do that, especially with strobes. You just need to cover all of the light coming out of your strobe to make sure that all of the light coming out is going through color. Otherwise, if it spills out one side, you won't get quite the saturation that you will otherwise. Okay. Let's talk through working with talent. This is an important little moment here because as we're talking about cinematic photography, the importance of the story is our focus. And so the story needs to be emoted from the person that you're working with. The first thing I want you to know is that you are a director in this circumstance. Photographers, we wear a lot of different hats. And in this situation, what you guys need to know is it's not about this idea of tilt left, tilt right, look down, look up. It's about them understanding what you're trying to say so that they help create the story and environment that you're looking for. You've heard me say it 1,000 times already, but you have to communicate this. One of the things I'll do on a set where we're doing really cinematic or story-driven images is I'll tell them the story. I'll tell them who they are or what we're trying to say with this image, because then they can start to get into that mindset. With athletes, one of the things I love about working with them is they're used to actually focusing in on something and visualizing. You want them to visualize these moments and see the story you're trying to say so that they can get into that character and they can find that emotion. Just a little while ago, we were working with an athlete And I talked her through what we were trying to show, which was a really intense scene. And I just asked her to go into a dark place. I asked her to find something that just, think about a moment where she lost, or where it was just everything was coming down. And she started just crying, and we started shooting. And we didn't talk, we just shot, and we just got all this beautiful footage and these still images. And that's where you need to be able to take your talent, is to take them through an emotional journey and to get them into a place where when you shoot it, the story you're trying to tell really comes through. Communicate in feelings and not in instructions. This goes back to that story that I was just telling. You need to help them find a place where they can feel what you're saying. I think so often we get caught up with tilt up, tilt down, little smile, smile with your eyes, blah, blah, blah. And those are fine things to have. I mean, you need to have them in your repertoire. But where I learned this idea was actually on a shoot with our homeless population in Colorado Springs. When I was in Colorado Springs, we did a big shoot where we brought in 16 different homeless people into a studio environment. And we wanted to tell their stories. But by the time we got them in front of the camera, you could tell it was hard. I mean, obviously, when you're a part of the homeless population and it's not your best time in life for the most part, it was really uncomfortable for them to be in front of the camera. And so what I started doing was I wouldn't look through the camera at all. And I would talk to them about a portion of their story that they had said that was really interesting, or that I thought would bring out the emotion that we were looking for. Like, one of the ones I remember most vividly was, there was a gentleman who he grew up in Wisconsin, and every year during the strawberry harvest, his mom would make strawberry shortcake from the fresh strawberries that they just had. And so I had him talk to me about that, talk to me about the smells, talk to me about the taste, and how he felt when his mom would come home, or he'd pick the strawberries, or what was his role. And as he talked, he looked at me, and you could see the emotion in his face, and you could see what he was going through. And we took the images, and I maybe took 10 frames per person, and still was able to get these beautiful pictures of them, because it was the emotion that we saw in their faces. And if you can learn to communicate that way, whether it be an actor or actress who are trained to do that anyways, or if it's a person that you're telling their story, talk to them about their story, get them into those moments that you know they can relate to. I'm going to go back to the story I just told about the girl crying. Sometimes, guys, we need to shut up. I know personally, I talk way too much. Unfortunately, you guys are stuck with me talking the whole time today. But I really have to teach myself to stop and say, man, this is a beautiful moment, and shoot. Let them work. Especially professionals, you need to let them work. Once you get them to the place that they want to go and everyone's on the same page, there's a flow that cannot happen if you keep talking the whole time. So let them work, let them feel the things they're going to feel, and go through those things. If it's little tiny coaching things here and there, then okay, but just get in that groove with them, start to work, and let that flow come out of you guys. Okay. Man, I think I'm doing, oh, whoa, I'm good on time. We're really,
right on an hour in, FYI.
Awesome. That's perfect. I'm going to go into some of the gear, you guys. Before I go into the gear and close up, I want you to know, I want to go back to what I said before. These things are super helpful tools, and I am so grateful to have them, but I want you guys to not feel like this is the reason why I'm able to create the images I create. I want you to be encouraged to go out and create. Regardless of what you have, I want you to walk away knowing that you need to go out and create with what you have with you right now. So Fujifilm, love being with them. I am an ex-photographer now, which is like still kind of mind-blowing to me. Love that. And oh, look, I think I'm writing on my, that's funny. Let me show you guys what I am using and what my go-to camera bodies are right now. The GFX 100 with just an absolute, I like to call it the beast. It makes incredible images, and it's the color that really drew me to Fujifilm, and the color coming out of the cameras just straight into Photoshop is so amazing. And I found that there's been a lot more manipulation that I can do with the images themselves when using the Fujifilm, especially some of their built-in color profiles are just incredible. Most of the things that you'll see me posting are from the GFX 100, but I also love shooting video and stills with the X-T3. The X-T3 is a little bit smaller. It's still go-to. I still use it for commercial work. In fact, if I send commercial work on the X-T3, most of the time the client can't even tell the difference. But it also enables me to do 4K video, which we just did a couple of commercials, and I use the X-T3 to shoot with that as well. So if you're someone who's looking to get into like directing and cinematography as well as shooting stills, the X-T3 / now the X-T4 is a great way to go. And I'll talk about the 56mm lens, but it actually like kind of changed my career a little bit. The X100V, this is like kind of an interesting one. I actually shoot with this all the time, especially when I'm just wandering around and with my family. It creates super cinematic images right out of the camera. And it's something I think you should consider, especially if you're just kind of trying to get in and have with you all the time. It's an easy go-to. I also hand it to my assistants to shoot behind the scenes all the time and shoot videos for me. We just did a big shoot in LA, and my assistant had the X100V the whole time just to take some really cool BTS for us. The lenses I use and the reasons why. So the 110 f2 is my go-to lens. And this is something to think about when you're talking about story and you're talking about the ability to tell your story best. I really love shooting with a super shallow depth of field, especially when I'm incorporating foreground and background elements that are just kind of leading the viewer's eye. I would highly recommend you guys have something in like the f2 or shallower range in order to change and create on the fly the ability to blur or put in focus things that will help lead your viewer through the image. And that's why I really love the 110. The 32-64 is just sort of a all-around lens. So if I'm in a space where I'm tight, and you'll see, I'll get into some places where we're in a really tight spot and I need to like jam myself up against the wall, and I'll have to have something like the 32 because I'm not able to move far enough away to use something like the 110. And then the 56mm 1.2, this lens actually I was going through, especially at the beginning of the year, was having just like I was burned out and there was just a lot going on. And I got this lens with the X-T3 and I went to Venice Beach and just started taking pictures of the skateboarders. And it was like a soul experience for me where I was able to create from a place of just creating. And now, if I feel burned out, I'll grab something like this and go out and create. And so be encouraged. I think I want that story to be encouraging to you guys that I get burnt out. There's so much going on all the time. And so to go out and create for yourself and create from that place of just ease and not having any expectations or having these very specific results or a client or something there, and go out and create on your own. And I didn't bring any lights. I don't bring anything. I just shoot. And I don't care if anyone ever sees the images. It's just something to create with. So that's why I always put the 56 on there, because it really did kind of help me in a weird time where I just needed to go out and create and be in a place where I didn't have all this pressure on me. Okay, guys, so final thoughts. I'm going to wrap up, and then I think I've left us enough time, for questions. Remember that you have a voice. It's really important. I'm a huge advocate, and actually I'll have some announcements coming on this in the next 6 months, but I'm a huge advocate for you guys knowing that what you do is powerful and what you do makes a difference in the world. And know that you have a responsibility with your gift. It's very Spider-Man of me. But with your gift comes a responsibility to use your voice to make the world a better place and to bring beauty into the world, which I think is a really cool opportunity that we have. Guys, be a student. I know I'm sitting here teaching, but I'm learning all the time. And my presentations will grow as I learn, and things will change. And that's something you guys all need to know is you're always learning. If you've arrived, it's probably time for you to be done, because there's always more to learn in this career. And I learn from different people, from different professions. I get different ideas from people outside of my career even. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know, or I'm going to have to go try, or I'm going to have to go learn it. Don't be afraid to do those things, and don't be afraid to fail. You will only grow as much as you fail. So don't forget that. When you go out there and you're a little nervous, it's okay. Just go out and create and learn from that and then move on to the next. And go shoot, you guys. When I first started photography, everybody kept saying, oh, you just need to shoot a lot. You need to shoot a lot. And I almost got tired of it because I thought it was like, no, certainly if you learn this, this, and this, you'll be okay. But in all reality, there's two things that I found. One, the emergence of your own personal voice comes from the time you put behind the camera. So as you guys start to see what stories you want to tell, that's only going to happen through you doing photography again and again and again. And two, the ability to make all of your cameras and lights and everything work the way you want them to comes through repetition. You have to get out there and you have to be shooting all the time. And last, guys, please have fun. I talk about this a lot. I love what I do. It's so much fun. There's a moment on set for me still every time I'm on and I just look around and I see all the people that I get to meet and the places that I go, and whether it's an abandoned building, which I love being inside of, or a studio with a huge team around me. And I look around and I just think, man, we're doing all of this because we get to use cameras and take pictures of stuff. So don't forget that while you guys are shooting. And that's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully I didn't go through that too fast. We got a few minutes for questions and hopefully we kind of held all those off. Let me stop sharing my screen and we'll have Michael hop back in here.
Well, first of all, Aaron, I'm disappointed to hear that art isn't hard work. What's this fun nonsense? What do you mean fun?
No, it's very hard work. I hate my job so much, and I think that no one else should do it. That's for sure.
We need to suffer for art. All right,
Yeah.
there weren't too many questions earlier. Now, if anybody's got any right now, go ahead and pop in. But let me answer one. You did talk about the importance of using gels for real.
Mhm.
But somebody wanted to know about whether you use any fog filters in post.
Fog filters in post, like something I would put on over the top of. Oh, yes.
You know,
yes.
for the haze, for creating haze, that kind of thing. They want to.
Yes, I absolutely do. In fact, I don't use filters. I use brushes. So if you want to add fog in post, the best way that I've found, I can actually tell you, it's called Kirst's Kirsts smoke brush. And what I've found is adding multiple layers with different smoke brushes and then masking them off and blurring some and having others be clear is the best way to get realistic looking smoke. And then you can color those to suit. So then I would just sample the colors that we use the gels on and use some of that to brush it in and brush it out. Gentler is better. Don't go crazy with smoke brushes. It's got to be real subtle.
I don't know if you want to mention, somebody I think is asking which post software you typically work in.
I always use Photoshop. I very rarely use Lightroom or anything like that. But I think because I was trained in retouching and that's where I started, every photo that I have goes straight into Photoshop. I do all my adjustments in Camera Raw. I know some retouchers who do the adjustments in Capture One. I'm not a huge fan of it as much, but I like just the workflow. For me, I start in Bridge, I go to Camera Raw, and then I go straight into Photoshop.
So let's go back to one of the earlier questions about locations. And is there something you want to talk about, permits and insurance?
Yeah, so both of those are important. For the most part, if you get a private location, you don't need a permit. So if you're in a place where they own the building and they're going to let you in, you don't have to worry about permits. If you're going to be in a public place where like you're on the street or you're going to be especially if you're going to be putting up lights of any kind or have any gear hitting the ground, you really want to make sure you cover your bases with permits. If you're getting into a situation where you need to pull a bunch of permits, I would highly recommend having a producer or someone else there with you to make it a little bit easier. Although most of your local permitting offices are pretty easy to find. Like I know in Colorado Springs, you can send one email and get permits for like pretty much anywhere in the city. The big thing about permits that I found is they tend to be pretty expensive. So if you can't find something private and you've decided to go out in public and shoot on a street or something like that, just be aware. Like I know in San Francisco, you have to like, if you're going to be on the street, you have to close it, then rent a cop, then have that location permit, and it gets real expensive really, really quick. So I would recommend trying to go through private parties first if you can, because then you're just being allowed into the building and you can shoot. With insurance, absolutely you should have insurance. If you don't, it's not that expensive. It's not as expensive as you would think to have like liability insurance. I have my gear and liability insurance, but most places are going to require you to have, I mean, what the common policy is like $1 million or $2 million per occurrence coverage. And it's usually in the hundreds of dollars per year. I think most people think that's going to be crazy expensive, but what they'll want is they'll want to be what's called added to your insurance, which is basically you give them a certificate saying that they're covered as well, which they already are, but it's just kind of a peace of mind thing. So make sure you look into insurance beforehand. And that also gives you clout as a professional, because if you walk in and say, oh yeah, I have insurance, here's my insurance certificate, it's going to help them to feel a lot more at ease and a lot more comfortable with you shooting there. A lot of times I'll bring it up if they seem on the fence or they seem like, hey, just so you know, I have insurance and I'll add you to my coverage if you'd like, to make sure that you guys have a certificate. And then when you're in abandoned buildings, one of the things that I've seen quite a few times is them having everyone on set sign a waiver saying that they are not responsible, just because when you get into abandoned settings, they are not clean. There's stuff everywhere, and like even stuff you could fall through or cut yourself on. And they just want to know that there's no liability on their part whatsoever. So having insurance, but then also we have everybody sign, and I'll either do it electronically and email it to them right then and there, or I'll have them sign it before we get to the location so that they have something in hand, which again, that's just helping you look more professional, and it's helping them feel more comfortable with you being in their space.
So here's a good question, especially since you move from city to city all the time. How do you find stylists?
Well, it's networking. It's funny how often these questions come up, but anywhere I go, I'm constantly trying to reach out and connect with people. I love coffee, mostly because I have to drink so much of it to have so many coffee meetings with people. And whenever I get to a new place, one of the first things I'm doing is I'm looking for a makeup artist and a stylist, and I'm looking for someone who could produce, or talent, models, athletes, anything that's in that area that I can start meeting people and getting more of a team together is so important. And it used to be, I'm very fortunate now to be traveling full time, because it used to be I would literally fly in to say Los Angeles, and I would just have meetings for 3 or 4 days. No shooting whatsoever, just meetings with potential clients, but also hairstylists and makeup artists and different producers and things like that, just so that I would know when I land on the ground, if I have a client say, hey, we need to do a shoot in Los Angeles, are you able to do it? This just happened to me. And I would say, yeah, I have a whole team in Los Angeles that I can pull from, and we can all get it together and shoot. And we did. And so, yeah, it's the mindset of photography, I think, really has to be networking minded, because we are freelancers. You know, we don't know where our next jobs are coming from. And the more people you know, the better. And plus, the thing that I say a lot is they're really, in this day and age, there are so many good photographers. And a lot of people will say, like, well, what makes one photographer better than the other? And I don't know that there's really a great answer to that question, other than that the only thing you have going for you is your personality, is who you are, and the fact that someone knows you that can hire you. That's really what photography is about, especially on the commercial level.
Let me ask you 2 Fujifilm specific questions, and I think we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Of the film simulations that we have, which ones do you seem to like the most?
Yeah.
And go back to the story about Venice and the 56 millimeters. Why did that lens change your way of thinking?
Yeah, I think I love the vivid the vivid color setting is my favorite. It just like puts colors in there that I wouldn't even think of necessarily. And I think the shift just for me to see it come out of the camera that way visually has like helped see how I can manipulate images further or push them more, which I really love that. And with the 50s,
I'm going to assume you shoot RAW and JPEG together.
I do. Well, no. So I only shoot RAW, but I see it come in.
Right.
Does that make sense?
You turn the film simulation on, and that's what you see in the viewfinder.
Mm-hmm. So when I see it coming through back at me, I see its potential, which I think is really cool. And then when I get it into Camera Raw, I know how far, or even I usually push it even farther than that, but it's neat to kind of get this idea of where we're going, which I found super useful. And then with the 56 millimeter, it was a number of different things that really happened that day and have happened since then. But shooting with a camera that can, and lens combination that can shoot in the lighting that I was shooting at the speed that I was shooting, it was just, I think it was just fun. I mean, to have pictures just coming out of your camera that just look beautiful naturally is really, really cool. And I was able to move in a way, and I mean, I'm biased. It was my pictures, but I felt like they were pictures I hadn't really seen shot there before because of the camera's ability to move between people's legs or go with and use a pole for foreground and make it blurry. And so it's like you don't know it's there, but it's there. And this goes back to this idea of cinematic photography of how are we telling the story and framing the story with what we have. And that 1.2 and the 56 and its ability to focus quickly on a skateboarder and then put something in the foreground totally out of focus just to create an effect. I was using poles and legs and hair and all these different things, and it just created images that I really love. And I mean, at that point, it doesn't really matter if anybody else loves those images because it was what I was feeling in that moment. And I think that's what I lose sight of sometimes that can lead to burnout is like sometimes it just doesn't matter that everybody, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's just that you get to be out there creating and seeing your vision come to life. And anytime you have a tool that can help create what you see in your mind, I think it's worth it because it's just such a cool, it's such a cool experience. And I just saw Richard said million insurance was 300 or so. Exactly. And that sounds about right. Especially if you're not insuring your equipment, that's going to be pretty close.
Yeah. David, you want to say something? Because we're going to sign off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the FujiFilm team and to Aaron for another incredible presentation. Your insights, your knowledge and experience, and the fact that you can share them with all of us is just an amazing opportunity. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all you guys coming out and just supporting me and following along the journey. I love being on it with you guys.
Well, we appreciate it. And to all of you who joined us today, thank you very much. We do continue with more Fujifilm presentations online today. At noon, we've got a roundtable with our Fujifilm team again, talking about specific questions you may have about any of their equipment. And then at 3 o'clock today, we have Street Encounters, the art of photography, photographing strangers. So please join us again there. And a reminder, Samy's camera stores are open. We are practicing social distancing protocols for in-store shopping, touchless curbside pickup for those of you who prefer that, and 24/7 on Samys.com. We've got a lot of great deals on Fujifilm cameras and lenses and accessories all throughout the holiday season. So please stop by or click on our website and take a look. Thank you all for joining us and have a great holiday season.
Thanks, guys. And I want to say really quickly before everyone goes, if you guys have questions that didn't get answered, I'm at Aaron Anderson Visuals on Instagram. Shoot me a direct message and I'll be happy to try and address it for you.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Take care.